Welcome to the Palestine Solidarity Podcast with your host, Katie Miranda. You can support this podcast by subscribing to Katie's Patreon at patreon.com/Katie Miranda, or by visiting Katie's online jewelry and art store at katiemiranda.com. PalBox is a non-profit subscription box supporting Palestinian farmers, artisans, and the international solidarity movement. You can subscribe at palbox.org. All of these links can be found in the description of each episode.
Hi, this is Katie Miranda with the Palestine Solidarity Podcast. Today I am interviewing Dee, who just got back from 3 months in Palestine working with the international solidarity movement. Dee is an anarchist from the Pacific Northwest. They live in Olympia, Washington, which is where Rachel Corrie is from, and has a relationship with that family. They have done solidarity work in Palestine, Canada, and Mexico. So Dee, you mentioned you had a relationship with the Corrie family. Is that how you first came to know of ISM, or how did you come to know of ISM?
Well, Rachel is a small town hero here where I live, and was a big part of the school that I went to as well, which was Evergreen State College. You know, there's a memorial for her, and I think Olympia has a lot of history revolving around her and her relationship to Palestine. Like our food co-op was one of the first places to fully boycott and divest from Israeli products. It was a big part of the BDS campaign, and her parents were a large part of that, and pushing that, and continue to do great solidarity work for Palestinian people locally and abroad. And I had also shared, professors that she had shared and advisors and stuff like that, and have managed to spend some time with the Corries themselves, who are really wonderful people. So I will say that definitely influenced me wanting to become involved and to get more educated on Palestine itself. I also think that the city itself and the school, the Evergreen State College, were really good at helping kind of get that information out to people and to be an example of how to show solidarity internationally. So I do believe that contributed, but my feelings about Palestine and the apartheid and the occupation there have been with me even prior to when I lived in Olympia, for sure.
Rachel, wow, what a legacy she's left. She's actually the reason I first heard of ISM. I first heard of ISM when she was killed.
Mm-hmm.
So you were in Palestine from the end of December till the end of March. So you just got back a few months ago. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what you witnessed and what activities you participated in?
Well, I cannot speak for the entirety of Palestine and what's going on there. Although I was able to travel quite a bit around it, I spent the majority of my time in the south, in Al-Khalil, or what's sometimes referred to as Hebron. That's the majority of the time that I had. I was there because there was an intense need there. I was able to go to other spots, including the Gaza border, but that was where I spent the majority of my time. And the work that I was doing there was primarily school defense work, functioning as a protection and observer group, functioning inside of a protection and observer group. And that looked like doing a lot of accompaniment work and also doing a lot of coalition building on the ground. In reflecting back on it and what it looked like and what it felt like, etc. I'm still processing a lot of the stuff that I experienced there, a lot of the things that I saw, because I just went pretty recently home. But I saw a very, very resilient people which, is something that you maybe read about or see in news articles or hear about. I got a lot of secondhand information about Palestinian lives, prior to going, but I think really being there really, really brought that home in a very visceral way.
Isn't
That
it though?
Yeah,
It was
very
the same for
visceral.
me. And
Yeah,
yeah, the
just
resilience of the people is just, it's really inspiring.
yeah, it's a strength that I am just fully just feel like it was such a privilege for me to see and to live amongst such powerful and strong ties and histories, and just the people were just so fantastic and beautiful. The kindness, particularly, was kind of jarring, to be honest.
Hmm.
As someone who lives in the United States, it was kind of it's kind of mind blowing, and I'm very, very humbled by that. Very, very humbled. And I also saw and experienced from afar, from a very privileged, standpoint, just how visceral the brutality also is. So it's kind of a combination of those two things that I really walk away from, which was this strong feeling of what powerful and resilient people, and being amazed by their resistance, while also seeing this brutality so up close and personal, and just really experiencing it and seeing, like, not in a theoretical way, but in a very
Right.
praxis oriented way.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that you're still processing your
Hmm.
experience. I'm still processing mine, and it was 10 years ago that I
Oh, I
was
believe it.
working with ISM. I'm actually working on a painting of Palestinians right now. It's what I was working on right before this interview. So, yeah, it's a profound experience, as listeners who have been there well know.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the strength and the pain that of all the people that I met, all their stories, you know, they're in me, and it's my responsibility and moral obligation to take those stories, feel them, and then give them to other people and share them. So I'm pleased to be interviewed about it and to continue to have dialogues about it and share it with people. And yeah.
Yeah, totally. Do you have a particular story in mind that you'd like to share, or do you want to talk more about the accompaniment and coalition building?
I mean, I think that I think the longer that I was there day by day, the more and more I was able to understand the situation, and the more that I was able to see that resistance is in every single act of living within the open air prison that is Palestine. Like, just everything from walking down the street to continuing to go to work to raising children, the kindness, all of it just seemed just such radiant acts of resistance that I saw, and that became more and more apparent to me every single day. And just attitudes, it was really, really life affirming and beautiful to see.
Can you describe the nature of the accompaniment work? Like, what is the problem that you guys are there to mitigate, and how are you mitigating it, and what are some of the incidents you experienced during the accompaniment?
Okay, well, like I said before, I was mostly working in Al Khalil, and Al Khalil is one of the most occupied cities in the world, supposedly. Definitely one of the more occupied ones I can think of in Palestine, excluding Gaza, of course. And what that looks like is checkpoints everywhere and a very interesting zoning system of H1 and H2 zones, which was there's lots of restricted access. Now, within Al Khalil, there is a massive amount of schools, and there is a big
Palestinian schools, right?
yeah, Palestinian schools that are in between H1 and H2 zones or in H2 zones. And so in order for kids to get to school, they would have to pass through several checkpoints. Then when in school, it's challenging for them to be able to maintain being there. So essentially what the labor that we were doing to pick up and try to be helpful was we would help accompany the youth through checkpoints from their homes, through these checkpoints, multiple checkpoints, then try to get them through the day of school and then get them out of school, out of the checkpoints, back to their areas. And we were short-staffed. We were a pretty small crew. And so we were only really able to focus on three schools and three major checkpoints, which was the Cordoba School in the Tel Rameda area and Katoon and Salemi. This seemingly easy sounding task of getting kids through the checkpoints and into school, keeping them there and getting them out, was never easy. Every day was highly dramatic and highly challenging. And we were constantly met with force via the military police, the police, the IDF soldiers themselves, and most interestingly, settlers, violent Zionist extremist settlers.
What kind of force would the soldiers and the border police use against the kids?
We saw a lot of, well, there's a whole process. First, you're going through checkpoints. Now, they take forever to get through. They will stop and frisk you, go through your stuff, turn your stuff upside down, make you pull your clothes up and down, etc. So there's this kind of psychological warfare, this humiliation that they first have to go through at each individual checkpoint on their way to school.
And these are elementary school kids, right?
Yes, these are young. Everyone was under the age of 13 that I was focusing on, including there was also a kindergarten involved. So that's the first thing. Then between the checkpoints on the way to the actual school, you could be stopped. Same thing, frisked, all your stuff turned upside down. It's just this reoccurring psychological kind of warfare. And the protection groups on the ground, both Palestinian and international alike, that were helping navigate through this, we all believed that would have escalated further, and there would have been more kind of physical violence had we not been there. That's a theory that we hold. But what we would often see by all these various institutional enemies, the military, the police, etc., is once the kids were getting towards the school, they would provoke and harass, and eventually it would escalate to using concussion grenades, using tear gas, rubber bullets, etc. Live fire, not very often, but I have seen live fire used towards students on their way to school.
And what was the circumstances of this firing of live ammunition and tear gas and sound grenades against elementary school students? Like what caused that?
I would say that it was usually provoked by a particular set of settlers who were being really aggressive almost every day. There was a particular set of settlers that would come and kind of stir things up and get loud and get angry, and then kids would react, and there's lots of fear, confusion, and then there would be all this excessive force being used after the fact.
So these kids are getting tear gas and sound grenades fired around them or at them or whatever on their way to school.
Yeah, and that's the first half of the day, right? So first we get through the checkpoints. Then we got to get past all these state entities and these settlers. And when I say specific settlers, I mean there were specific settlers that would get up every day, make breakfast, would hang out with their family, etc., and then go down to the schools to harass the kids.
Let me guess, Annette Cohen?
And Ofer Ohana. Yes, of course.
Oh,
Um,
she's still doing the same shit.
she's still doing the same shit, and she's still kicking you in the shins. She still does the shin kick.
She did that to me.
Yeah, she loves it. She's smart about it. So yeah, and then of course, once the kids are in the school, right? Then, at any given moment, if a soldier decides to, for shits and giggles, they'll just attack the school, which we saw happen multiple times, particularly in the Salemi area. We saw attacks on schools in the middle of the day, and you asked what was kind of the reasoning behind this, like what were they provoked in some way?
What was the
And
justification?
the justification, I don't believe that there was one. I think it's a pathology that is very hard for me to grasp and to understand, that led to these attacks. I think this is that the existence of the kids going through the checkpoints, going through these areas that these people feel so entitled to, and have been from, a lot of these soldiers from a young age have been taught that this is, that things are one way. And so they hold this pathology, they hold this ideology, and the existence of these children going into these spaces, going to these schools, is an insult to them and to their land. They have this very kind of warped and fascistic kind of ideology. So I don't believe that any of the situations in which these young children were attacked were ever justifiable. I can't think of any instance in which children being, having grenades and fired at is ever justifiable, obviously.
Did you ever ask the soldiers, like, why are you doing this?
Yes, me particularly, I am not that great at communicating with the IDF. Me particularly, I found it to be very exhausting and very hard to try to relate and communicate with these soldiers that I was having violent interactions with. Very common. My comrades, the people around me, the people that I worked with, those who maybe could have a softer approach with those types of people, did try. There was communication, and like I said, it's this pathology. It's this feeling of entitlement that this is their land and that these people should go somewhere else, and that they're imposing on their land, and that they're all violent, and that they're violent terrorists and criminals who want to destroy Israel and the Israeli state. It's just this dissidence. And I empathize. I do. I truly empathize with many of the soldiers that I did have lots of interactions with, communicated with, even the ones that would beat the shit out of me. I would empathize with the fact that this was how they were born. This was what they were bred into, raised into, this kind of ideology. And I mean, as someone who comes from the United States, who lives in a fascist state full of, racism and a very dark history, I can also understand, to a certain degree, what it's like to live in a place like that and grow into these ideologies, etc. So, although I fully disagree, and I find it to be inhuman what a lot of these young men were doing to these children, I can somewhat grasp my head around the concept, even though it's physically very and emotionally challenging for me to understand, and I probably will never understand, how people can commit such violent acts against other human beings and be have such amount of brutality.
And just go home at the end of the day like it was just another day's work.
Yeah,
Not
and
have any conscience or nagging guilt about it. Or I don't know, maybe they do. Maybe it haunts them.
Well, the statistics around the stories, the gathered stories of people who get out of their military service and then realize, oh shit, I was doing the wrong thing. I was on the wrong side of history.
Right.
There is a large amount of these people. These people do exist, and these people, the majority of them were stationed in Al Khalil, in Hebron, or out in Gaza, etc. I mean, I want to believe that even with, a misguided ideology, a misguided history, etc., that we can still be humanized through seeing things like this and can recover and change. I believe that.
So you wrote a report back for the ISM newsletter that I read, and that's why I decided to interview you. You were talking about this fascist Israeli settler group called Im Tertsu.
Tertsu, yeah.
They were one of the organizations fighting to kick out the other observers from Hebron. And just to give a little bit of background, TIF, Temporary International Presence in Hebron, which was You want to explain TIF? What TIF was?
Sure. Well, there was the Goldstein massacre at the Ibrahimi Mosque. Happened about 25 years ago, and as a result of that, the Israeli state said, "Hey, we're gonna solve this problem. We're gonna fix this problem. We're gonna do a bunch of temporary checkpoints, and we're gonna try to make it safer for everybody." Those temporary checkpoints became real checkpoints. That's why a part of pretty much all of Hebron is cut off and sectioned into these two different zones. Shortly after,
just to backtrack, the massacre was when the settler Baruch Goldstein killed 22 Palestinians in the mosque, right?
Yes, which is a terrible, terrible, tragic thing that happened.
Yeah.
The UN responded by forming Temporary International Presence in Hebron, which was an observer group that was very well funded, that was there to document war crimes and anything that was illegal or violent, etc. And they did do that. They did that for about 25 years. And they faced a lot of repression from violent settler groups and from the state, etc., including Im Tertsu, who Im Tertsu really took the they organized what they call camera commandos, which were essentially their version of observers that were there to observe the observers, because the observers were in part of a social war to condemn Israel and condemn Israel's actions against Palestinians, etc. So Im Tertsu did a pretty aggressive campaign against them and against all other international observers, including ISM, where they would come and they would, film people doing solidarity work. I personally don't believe that Im Tertsu succeeded in kicking out TIPH. I think that they annoyed the shit out of them, but I don't believe that they are the reason why TIPH left. I believe that they left as a result of political reasons. I believe that Netanyahu was like, I'm gonna kick them out, and to show force and to continue to secure votes from his most extremist and violent and well organized population.
That's what I heard from some Palestinians I interviewed from Hebron last month. So
yeah, that's my political interpretation of it. I also believe that TIPH had a lot of mixed. There's a lot of mixed feelings about how effective they were. I mean, there was very little that came of TIPH as far as creating any kind of change or reduction of harm with the conditions already there. So there is some criticisms of them in general.
Because they're sort of impotent to intervene. All they could do was stand around and write in their notebooks, right?
Yeah, and that's what Palestinians saw also.
Right.
But there, I think it also is, it's particularly in areas that I know that I was unable to reach due to lack there of numbers. There was a sense of security, I believe, that came from them being there.
I always felt better when they were there, even though I knew they would never help me if I got into a precarious situation. But,
Hmm.
I'd rather they be there than not there.
Yeah, so I think there's that. I think there's that feeling of I'd rather have you here than not. But also, I think there was a lot of broken hearts about the lack thereof actual change that happened from them being there.
Yeah.
Um, if I'm being completely honest. But yeah, at the time, I essentially landed in Al Khalil the moment that TIPH had gotten kicked out.
Woo!
They were there for 1 week that I was there, and at the exact same time, another major observer group on the ground, EAPPI, which I can't pronounce the name of their church for the life of me.
Me neither.
Ecumenical. I don't know.
Ecumenical, I think.
Yeah.
Ecumenical Association. I don't know what the rest is.
Yeah. They also, they got together. They had a bunch of meetings with their higher ups, et cetera, all the way up the ladder, and they decided that it was too much of a liability for them to continue to work on the street.
And was
So they were,
that because of Im Tirtsu?
well, this was because TIPH was pulled out.
Oh, okay.
So they were like, okay, we can no longer have you on the ground because we think that it's just not safe. But Im Tirtsu had been targeting them, had been targeting TIPH, was targeting CPT, the Christian Peacemaker Team, and also targeting ISM. So it was a very interesting time when I landed on the ground because half of the international observer and protection groups had now been uprooted and pulled out of the streets. Also, Im Tirtsu, who had had campaigns against both these groups, now felt incredibly emboldened, like they had succeeded in their campaigns of, harassment and terror, and that they were winning some kind of social war. So that put a lot of tension in the streets, and also put a lot of extra weight on ISM and on CPT, who were then the only international observer and protection groups. And I would argue that CPT in written principle is not a protection group, but in praxis during this time has had to kind of pick up that slack also. Mm-hmm. And so this was the beginning of, for me, a very close relationship with CPT. We became kind of like a sister group. We were constantly communicating, organizing, working together, being at checkpoints, doing all this labor together. And then it kind of, because there was such this gap now, not only did we have to fill it, but then we had to work with other Palestinian groups, other observer and protection groups, to kind of build this coalition. So as it was equally a very terrifying and strange time, because we were losing these outside sources that were supplying support. And we have this like very emboldened fascist group who's like, clapping and having huge parties in the street, celebrating, kicking out these groups. But on the other side, on the flip side of it, we saw this really interesting kind of, for me, it felt historical kind of moment where international and Palestinian groups were building these like big networks and developing a coalition to kind of fill that gap. The only unfortunate thing is that requires more Palestinian participation, and there's confusion on. I think it's confusing as to whether or not you want more or less, because you want to reduce the harm of these people, right, by bringing in your privilege and being an outsider. But but I also am going to support Palestinians organizing for themselves and being able to support themselves in that way. So there's kind of a conflict and a contradiction there. But overall, I think there was a good and a bad to this unique time that I landed there. That's for sure.
Yeah, some of the Palestinians from Hebron that I interviewed last month, they said that after TIPH, they had to strengthen their communication within their own community to kind of warn each other about something happening, or hey, there's some settlers here, we need to film them, and just kind of tighten the neighborly bonds to
Mhm.
mitigate this violence with their cameras, because the cameras do have a detrimental effect on the violence.
Yeah, I mean, we were all there was it was really beautiful to see. Like I said, it's contradictory, but it was very beautiful to see, to be working side by side with these Palestinian protection groups and working so closely with the Hebron Defense Committee and with the human rights defenders and the overall Dismantle the Ghetto campaign, and to develop those ties and relationships. I'm very, very grateful for that experience and for being able to get to learn from them and to share knowledge and to just really work so closely with people. It was a very interesting and beautiful thing I got to experience, but also very, very challenging time. Absolutely, because this was all out of sheer necessity.
Yeah.
And as you know, as TIPH left and EAPPI were pulled out, which I'm not even sure if they're still pulled out. They were trying to get back in EAPPI. They were fighting tooth and nail, at least the Al Khalil team, to get back on the street.
Uh-huh.
They didn't want to be pulled out. It was their, some chain of command shit or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know what that situation looks like because I haven't been there since, but I know that right as this happened and as we, started building these coalitions together, it seemed like everything was also escalating in a much more violent way. The work got more and more challenging every week that I was there, unfortunately.
Can you give us an example of some incidents like that?
Well, my first couple weeks there, I had a kind of a sense of security that my privilege and that my, United States status would in some way protect me from, I think maybe that was naive to a certain degree.
I think I probably felt the same way.
Yeah,
about a week.
Yeah, the first 2 weeks probably felt okay. But we would communicate stuff back to our people, and our people would be like, well, even that's kind of unusual for them to go that far, blah blah. And they develop new strategies. It seems like collectively all these entities collectively would work together to create new strategies to shut us down every day. And it seemed like even our Palestinian comrades were telling us, like, it seems like they're putting an unusual amount of attention on internationals.
Like, what would they do?
Well, they would not let us through checkpoints. We'd have to run around, do this whole song and dance because we'd have to go, find another way in every day. And then when we were there, cops would rough us up, soldiers would rough us up, settlers would, just everybody. And in collaboration, 100%, to a point where they weren't even trying to hide it. That's what was really kind of eye-opening to me, was the settlers
directing
really kind of
soldiers.
Just totally directing the soldiers. Yeah. And no shame about it. Just very obvious. But some things that we saw was lots of arrests, lots of shakedowns. I mean, there would be times when we'd be walking on the street and we wouldn't even be doing anything. And the next thing I know, I'd hear some footsteps and we'd be up against the wall getting strangled by fully armed soldiers. So that was kind of something that we weren't fully expecting. And that was the kind of stuff that escalated. Obviously, Annette and Ofer being annoying as hell, and Annette, attacking, spitting, pushing, kicking, just using every part of her body to be violent. But the most annoying thing that we would see was the new use of maybe an old tactic, but seemed to be brought back in when we were fully not committing to being removed from situations, like when we were arguing with the cops and they had no right, or we were arguing with the military police, or arguing with the soldiers and they had no right in that situation to physically remove us. And we played that whole fucking back and forth game with them. that eventually they would get closed military zone orders.
Yeah.
And this was a new thing. So they started closing the zones and making them bigger and bigger for longer and longer periods of time. And then started coming up with reasons to arrest observers and protection group people completely out of thin air, like literally framing people for nothing. And it was to a point where it was almost a joke. You know, someone would come up and point at me and be like, I saw that one throw a Molotov cocktail last week, and then they'd throw you in jail. So
yeah, I experienced something similar actually.
Yeah,
nothing new.
And the closed the closed military zone order is annoying because it affects all of the people who live within that area. So, you know, if I'm trying to be, you know, I'm trying to be tough, flex on these soldiers, try to push back, try to get these kids to school. Now they've closed the whole zone. This now means that they can, you know, everyone can get kicked out of the school, or some people now can't go home. So that was a thing that was really frustrating because it felt like in us trying to do our work, when we were the tactic of our enemies was to then collectively punish all of the other people, right? And this is a reoccurring thing that the IDF does and that the Israeli state does, is collective punishment. You know, one person makes one mistake, one person does something that pisses them off, and then everybody's going to deal with the repercussions. Also, we saw the more and more we were getting arrested, there was more and more conditions that were being put on us. For instance, you can't be in this area for 3 days. Then it was 10. Then it was 30, which actually stops us from being able to do a lot of our job. And of course we didn't comply with the military zones. Of course we didn't comply with the bans, et cetera, et cetera. But it was like there was all these new and interesting forms that they would of trying to stop us that would come up just like every week, and we would have to strategize around how to navigate through it, and then we would, and then there would be a new thing. So that was kind of just a bummer or annoying. Like, it's just fucking annoying. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not going to ask you about your strategies because that all they want is something that should not be publicized. But I just want to congratulate you for being steadfast with that and for not backing down. I know it's really difficult having to strategize how to get some kids to school every day, like when they're being attacked from all angles. And it's just such a ridiculous concept. Like, why should elementary school kids have to battle the military just to get to school? I mean, like, it's like, seriously? You know, like, what is up with that? And when I was there, I thought, I just have to come back to the U.S. and me with the rest of all the Solidarity volunteers. We have to get this information to people in Congress, and they will do something about it, because once they know about this shit that's going on, and, you know, of course, that didn't happen, and it's just, I don't know, it makes your head want to explode just thinking about it.
Yeah, it's absolutely heartbreaking. It really is.
And they're still facing this, and the kids that I was helping to school are probably parents now, maybe, and they're having to watch their kids go through the same thing, and nothing's changed. In fact, it's gotten worse, I think.
I can guarantee it's gotten worse.
Yeah.
And yeah, I can guarantee it's gotten worse. This is another thing, we're doing this interview today. I haven't been there in 3 months. I have no idea how much worse the situation has become.
Yeah.
It's equally surprising to me how terrible the conditions are becoming, and yet how strong and how much, like I said earlier, just power Palestinians seem to have. I mean, they're still marching forward. They want to hold on to their homes. They want to hold on to their culture. They want to continue to build roots and have families there, even though the conditions are becoming worse and worse, and the violence seems to be escalating, and the fascist groups become more emboldened. it's just absolutely mind-blowing to me.
What did people on the ground, I mean, the Palestinians on the ground, ask of you? What did they want you to do when you returned home? What do they want in the way of help from the international community?
Well, that's a complex question. Um, I obviously can't speak for all Palestinian people, right? And like I can't
Right.
speak, and I can only speak for those who I interacted with, those that I worked hand in hand with, those that I became friends and family with. And from my experience, what was asked of me um, was to share these stories, right? To like take this and take it home. I know that people expressed wanting to hear, like wanting their stories to be told, and also expressed wanting there to be more work on contacting government and boycotting and divesting and sanctioning, etc. But I also heard from people that you know they need they need people there. People are needed there, and that they are happy to have people there, and they want people to continue to come. And that doesn't necessarily mean going and doing solidarity work and using your body in the same way that I may have, or the people that I was working with. That can be simply just going there and participating in their tourism, going and hanging out with a Palestinian family and going and having them be your guide and showing you the reality of their life there, and also showing you the like pure joy and the beauty that exists there. And that was a thing that was really important for me, is realizing that, underneath all of the seemingly traumatic and kind of awful things that were there, there was so much beauty to see. Like, it's such a gorgeous and amazing place. And I think that not like seeing Palestinians as people and seeing their home as this beautiful place is also like really important and part of that. Not just seeing it as this like war-torn apartheid state.
Yeah, you were
Which is
there like towards the beginning of spring, which is when all the wildflowers bloom, and I that was my absolute favorite season there, just
mm-hmm,
because it was so beautiful.
mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and another thing you touched on is the tourism, and I just want to kind of support that, because not everybody is ready to go jump in and confront the soldiers and the settlers like ISM volunteers do. But going as a tourist, or just to visit and see the sights, it's supporting the economy there, and their economy for tourism is so much less than in Israel, because most people, they don't go on vacation in Palestine unless they have family there. Um, but people go to Israel for tourism all the time, and so even if you're you're not ready to get into solidarity work, just going as a tourist and listening to people and hearing their stories it's just such a amazing experience, and I highly encourage it.
Yeah, I do too. And I think normalizing tourism there to a certain degree also helps, like also physically reduces harm as well. Like I know that there's a lot of people who don't know much about the situation there, who would go, to go to Bethlehem, etc. And Ramallah has kind of become a normalized place for tourists to go. And they would go just because, it was cheaper and they didn't even know, but to a certain degree, having those people just there spending money and being a part of the economy, somewhat reduces the possibility of harm to the people who live there. I think if there was much more, maybe, I think it's possible, maybe, I'm not 100% sure, but maybe if there was more tourism in places like the Gaza border, you know, maybe there would be less murder there. I don't know. Who knows?
Holiday in the sun at the Gaza border.
Yeah, come eat some strawberries, have some fish. There's, maybe if it wasn't all Zionists who were going on vacation there, that there would be more exposure. Or maybe I don't know. Kind of going off on a tangent on that one.
If somebody was considering going to Palestine to volunteer with ISM or another organization, and maybe they're hesitating a little bit, what would you want to tell them?
Huh. Um, I would want to sit down and talk to them, obviously. And I would want to hope that they're going for the right reasons. Because I think there's a lot of different reasons to go. And I think when people are participating in solidarity work, either locally or internationally, it's really important to do it for the right reasons, like don't, and understand the principles. Like that's one of the things I particularly really enjoy about ISM and their principles is, it's not about being a savior of some sort or doing it for some self-fulfilling reason, but it's really about accompanying and supporting and listening and trying to help others facilitate their own determination. So I think that's a big one. Like I think that's a big moral thing for me when if people are interested in going, just make sure that you're going for the reasons that feel right and that you're going to support people in their own determination. And I would also I would tell people to make sure they're ready, acknowledge that it's hard work. But I think like most hard work, it's really fulfilling and I think will give you something of value for the rest of your life. I think that's kind of how it is with a lot of solidarity work or even social work, any kind of work that just is tough. I think being exposed to it can help us in a lot of ways. And also, I think one of the benefits for me of studying abroad is how much and doing work abroad is what I can take home with me and how I can learn from other people and their strategies and kind of take them home and apply them on my own. So I don't know. I'm not sure if I fully answered your question.
No, you did fine. Mm-hmm. One last question for you. How did your trip change you?
Huh. Well, yeah, I think the big ones are just really, I think I feel very humbled. I feel very humbled being home and being able to look at my own life and to look at the privilege that I have and the place that I live, my country. I think I have better perspective on my own country. I think I have a better understanding of global politics as well as the rise of global fascism, the refugee crisis that we have collectively throughout the world. All this stuff makes much more sense to me. So I feel better equipped at looking at every other political or economical situation. I also learned a lot about my strengths and my weaknesses, about how tough and not tough I am. And that was humbling too. But I think I mostly come back with just an overall greater understanding and sense of humanity that I am so grateful for. That's my biggest take, I think. I think I have a better understanding of humanity in its most beautiful ways and also in its most just daunting and sad kind of ways as well.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. That's such a beautiful takeaway about what you learned there. Mm-hmm. I am going to wrap this up now. Thank you very much, Dee, for sharing all of your experiences with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.